Welcome back. You're listening to Across the Border. This is a live prophecy reality edition. And in this segment, this entire hour, or two segments, we're going to jump back into prophecy and the discussion we began last week when I was reviewing this article. Well, not the one on the screen. However, if I change the screen, this is the screen from last week. You can see there's me last week. Do I look a week older? Anyway, you can see up there it says, the Earth Beast of Revelation 13 are the Jesuit generals of Rome. We go back to the same page this week, and it says, the Earth Beast of Revelation 13 is led by the Jesuit generals of Rome. Wow, now there's a thesis I can agree with. 100%. The one last week said something different. And then when I read the article last week, it said the same thing. Okay? Kinda. It didn't make any sense. Well, he changed I guess I had some effect, because I meant the show last week as constructive criticism toward this man and his article and his belief, because he states things, and the best support, the best evidence he has is that other people repeated the same thing a couple times in history. And men of renown repeated it. You know, very famous men in the past have repeated the same thing, but none of them ever went to the scripture and said, aha, here it is in the scripture. But they repeated this idea that the earth beast is a division of the Roman Church, and also the earth beast is the false prophet. And he was saying that the earth beast are the Jesuit generals of Rome too. So he's saying all of these things, none of which can be supported by scripture. As a matter of fact, from my study, the scripture excludes all of those conclusions. So I see the article pretty much looks exactly the same. I haven't read the whole thing, but I read the opening of it compared with the screenshot I just showed you, and it says the same thing. You know, many people teach that the earth beast is America, but the four beasts, and that's a non sequitur, because the fourth beast of Daniel has nothing to do with the earth beast of Revelation chapter 13. Okay. And then he's got some links, and this is all the same thing. And after two sentences that make up two paragraphs, he gives a summary, which says something totally different. It's not even, you don't summarize. You don't have a summary that's longer. This summary is 5 sentences. What he's summarizing, the 2 paragraphs before it, are not even 5 sentences. Is less than 5 sentences. So the summary is longer than what he's summarizing, and really is not a summary, but it's a thesis. It may be a summary of his thesis or something. I don't know. And also, he removed the indentation. Remember, I spoke about, what's all this indented stuff? Is he quoting someone? Well, you see all the indentation is gone, so I guess this is all his own stuff. It doesn't look like he's quoting anybody, because obviously he wasn't, even though it looked like he was. So, and hopefully, well, he'll keep working on it and clean up more than just the title of the article. And I want to help him. That's why I'm writing on my new thesis, which I'm not going to release until I'm done. And we find that I'm writing it on WordPress here. Let me switch over to that. And here it is. As you can see, it's draft Apocalyptic-Beast-Symbols. And let me open it up. Bible-Decoded. We want to use the Bible to decode our apocalyptic symbols. Let's see, can I close that side window there? I don't know if I can or not, but I can do this, so I can make it wider this way. Okay, and so I'm going to share with you what I got so far. I'm pretty happy with it. It takes a long time to write a little bit, But I'm hoping, and what I'm going to do, this is going to be part of and parcel of, I guess, my next book or booklet. This one will probably only be about 100 pages because I can't draw things out and quote other people and write whole books just quoting other people, and to make it 400 pages and get way past my point, to try to impress people by the volume of stuff that I can put in a book. No, I want to impress people with how much I can say to help them understand without overloading them with information and obfuscating the fact, or forgetting, getting my thesis lost in a sea of facts and other quotes and stuff. I don't know. Seems to be a way of writing that some people prefer. Okay. So anyway, I start out Apocalyptic-Beast-Symbols, Bible-Decoded. Okay. That's very important that we're going to use the Bible to get our interpretation. Okay. I just used decoded because that's the word. My inspiration is this guy who writes all these decoded books, even though I think he doesn't say Bible decoded, it's just decoded. And I think his decoder ring is broken, or his Rosetta Stone is not a true one, but maybe a counterfeit. That's a joke. Yes. So much about this symbol, and specifically speaking of the beast symbol, and I had to change that to these symbols, is assumed and believed with very little biblical foundation. Certainly God has explicitly used this symbol, or these symbols, to represent what he reveals in divine interpretation. Divine interpretation is only what the Bible itself explicitly reveals as an interpretation in the context of any apocalyptic symbol used. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, divine interpretation. It's because I'm very interested in divine interpretation. That's the interpretation I'm going for. You won't find that in a book of speculation, which is mostly what futurism is speculation. Divine interpretation is only what the Bible itself explicitly. It's not what you can conjecture. It's not what you can conjure out of the Bible using conjecture. Conjecture and conjure are kind of closely related. So divine interpretation is not what you can conjecture by unrelated verse out of the Bible, okay? But it is only what the Bible itself explicitly reveals as an interpretation in context of any apocalyptic symbol used. And for instance, you can go to Revelation chapter 1, and it says, and the 7 candlesticks are the 7 churches. Okay? That's a divine interpretation of the symbol being used. The symbol being the candlesticks that Jesus is walking amongst. Okay? The divine interpretation says that the 7 candlesticks are the 7 churches. So we know that when we get to a candlestick being used as a symbol, and then, there are a lot of symbols like that. So what we're looking for is a divine interpretation when an apocalyptic symbol is used. And there are plenty throughout Daniel and the Revelation. There are plenty of there's plenty of divine interpretation. There is enough divine interpretation given by God himself in the scripture that we should be able to get a fairly clear understanding as men as to what the prophecy is about. And nobody's going to have a 100% clear understanding. We have to accept that right off the bat. But how clear can we get? Well, only if we are looking at the divine interpretation, not making it up, not getting it from unrelated or non-apocalyptic scripture. Sometimes it can apply if it's a symbol is not apocalyptic, and sometimes it can't. We have to be very careful there on making that kind of determination. But if it's explicitly, like the example I just gave you, okay, and there are plenty of those throughout in the context of apocalyptic prophecy given in the scripture that we should know, especially concerning the beast and the related symbols, the symbols that are related to the beast. So moving on. For instance, in Daniel 7, and specifically this, for instance, having to do with the beast symbols. Okay. For instance, in Daniel 7, quote, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, unquote, 4 governing authorities are introduced as various beasts or animals. The first was like a lion. That's in a quote. Quote, the first was like a lion, unquote. Quote, a second like unto a bear, unquote. And the third, quote, like a leopard, unquote. And, I want you to know that these phrases are actually in the text. That's why I'm quoting them. The fourth, and quoted here, it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. We also learned that these 4 great beasts came up from the sea. When we overlay Daniel, chapters 2, 7, and 8, these 4 powers are revealed as Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, describing them as kingdoms and using the word nation. History verifies that these 4 and different powerful nations individually rose up in the Western European locality of the Old World. Okay, so we use history too, because history is reality. History verifies that our interpretation is correct. And this actually did happen. The prophecy was given. These nations did exist, but the sequence of events related to these nations was not fully fulfilled at that time or at separate times. Because chapter 7 we get when Daniel is under the Babylonians. And then, I believe, chapter 7 is when we're under the Medo-Persian Empire. And of course, so, because that's why it starts out with the king of whatever nation he was in when he wrote that chapter. So let's continue. History verifies that these 4 and different powerful nations, okay, those nations being Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, they individually rose up in the Western European locality of the Old World. Babylon first conquered Israel and assimilated all of the nations around her on its rise to power. And you can read about that in the scripture. We have that with the fall of Babylon. I mean, with the fall of national Israel, the destruction of the temple, and the beginning of the 70 years desolation period in the history of Israel. Babylon first conquered Israel and then went and conquered all of the nations around her. Then the Medes and Persians came in, and God judged Babylon by the Medes and Persians. Okay? The Medes and Persians then conquered Babylon and assimilated all that it had conquered. Alexander the Great, in his turn, took everything for Greece. When Alexander died, his kingdom was divided between 4 of his generals. So Alexander on the ram, was it a ram or a he-goat? One or the other. Let's see, the lion, a leopard, a bear. No, it was, anyway, he had a singular lamb. The ram had a singular horn, and it was broken off. depicting the time when Alexander died, and then the kingdom was divided, so 4 horns came up in its place, because the kingdom was divided between 4 of his generals. Out of one of those divisions of the Roman Empire being divided into 4, okay, or of Alexander's kingdom being divided into 4, the Roman Empire rose up, then conquered and assimilated the whole of Western Europe. According to the divine interpretation given in context with the prophecies, along with the witness of history, we verify the meaning of the beast symbol and the associated symbols attached to it. So here we're going to number them. This is what we've learned from divine interpretation, and as we've seen it played out in history, history has verified it. Number 1, specifically speaking of the 4 beast powers that are enumerated, they all dominated the Israel of God. And moving on, before Christ, national Israel; after Christ, the church, the supranational Israel of God, because this last beast extends into the New Testament era, beyond the national church, beyond the 70 weeks that were determined for Israel and the nation and the sanctuary. Okay? So, they all dominated the Israel of God, all these beast powers, before Christ, national Israel; after Christ, the church. Okay? Apocalyptic prophecy primarily has to do with beast powers that are concerned with and interact with God's people. I guess I have that under number 1 also, but it could be number 2. Just trying to enumerate some facts here, that what we learn about beast powers. Okay? 2, each beast power, as it rose up, had power over a specific locality identified as an individual kingdom or nation. They were original powers when they rose up. 3, each of the enumerated 4 sea beasts of Daniel conquered and assimilated the people and territory of the beast before it, having risen up from the same locality, the symbolic sea, Western Europe. This is verified by history itself. Then later, divine interpretation at Revelation 17:15 as the waters on which the whore sitteth, the whore that rides the beast, so where the beast is, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So the waters are sea, that's what they represent, in contradistinction to the next beast, the 7th beast and final beast that rises up, okay, which rises up out of the earth. But we're not going there yet. Joseph, glad to meet you there in Rome. He says, I want to own 4 volumes or Apocalyptic-A hardcover. I drifted into the site link offered, but came away uncertain of the experience. I'm not certain I know what that means, but if you wanted to buy them, they are available for those that want a copy of those. Go to horeapocalyptica.com, and yes, we are still fulfilling orders at that site for the full 4-volume set. You can get it in paperback, and you can get it in hardcover. And we offer, if you buy either the paperback or hardcover, we offer the ebook free with that. Or you can just buy the ebook version. So, and we email that to you. We don't have, that's not all automated, but yes. Yes, they do. It's a new edition. I call it the Quincentennial Reformation edition, or the 500th anniversary edition of the Reformation. And yes, it has all of the updates, and they're all noted in there. But I believe you'll find it an enjoyable experience. It's all been vetted and typoed, and you'll find very few errors in it. So, anyway, you can check that out. They're definitely worth having. And you can read it for free there, to make sure that's what you want. Although on the site there at horeapocalyptic.wordpress.com, I don't have all of the appendices in there. So, but I do believe I have 95% of the text of what you will be buying if you actually buy it. Some people might think, well, I don't have to buy it. It's free on the internet. And yeah, that's true. You can see I'm not trying to scam people for money. But some people like to have it in a library. Perhaps when the internet goes down, you might want a hardcover or paperback copy of it, just for your own reference work. But either way, do enjoy that there. But the entire revised and quincentennial edition version is there at horeapocalyptic.wordpress.com. Okay, well, back to our text here. So we got to the sea symbol and the waters, our peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Number 5, the sea symbol represents the locality where these individual beasts rose up. In this case, Western Europe. 5, none of the succeeding sea beasts were a division of any of the ones before them. Now, this is very important when we go to a site like the one I was talking about last week or at the beginning of this broadcast. None of the succeeding sea beasts were a division of the ones before them. They only assimilate when in the same locality. They do not divide into another beast's power. Any division is noted by the addition of horns on the beast. Okay? So we see there are rules there for interpreting. 1, they don't divide, they only assimilate. And in this case, when they're in the same locality, they all rose up out of the sea. So there's something different about the 7th beast that rises out of the earth. They don't have to assimilate, but we'll get to that because it's not out of the same locality. But any division in a beast is not noted because he's trying to say the earth beast is a division of the Roman Empire. Therefore, it can be the Jesuits, which never had a locality over which, like the other beasts that rose up out of that locality of Western Europe, they each had their own locality where they had their power base, where they rose up with a nation and then conquered more of the nations around them till finally Rome conquers the entire Western European continent. Okay? So any division in a beast is noted by horns, not by dividing into another and new beast and diminishing the one before it. That just does not happen. So I believe that's where the scripture excludes that interpretation. We'll continue when we get back from some messages. Don't go anywhere.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. You're listening Across the Border. This is a live prophecy reality edition. And we're getting into beast powers here and the associated symbols with a beast power. We're looking for a divine interpretation. And by divine interpretation, I mean what the Bible explicitly reveals. And of course, if we can verify that in history for that which has already been fulfilled, we can add the history to that and go, yes, because everything that God said would have already happened has already happened. And of course, that which is yet future, well, we're still waiting. We can't verify by history something that hasn't happened yet. So anyway, you can check out the Hore Apocalyptic Quincentennial, and here I have a complete set of those, the 4 volumes we have that we published. Spent a couple years, myself and Richard, and pray for Richard. He's been in the hospital for almost a month now, and he needs your prayer. I found out that I don't exactly know. They said his kidney shut down or something, and I have no idea what's going on there. I haven't heard anything from days, but anyway, I keep praying for him anyway. But together, he began it by spending thousands of hours editing, and then I finished the work by reading it through twice myself and doing the updates on it. And out of much of the work that I had been doing, and it also helped to clarify much of the work that I have done since then in my Reformed prophecy interpretation and my exposition of the Revelation. So, but those are available. You go to horeapocalyptic.wordpress.com, and if you press on, there's a book. It says purchase the 4-volume set there, and you can purchase it there. All those links, it's through PayPal, or you don't have to have a PayPal account because you can use a credit card with PayPal, but you can get it there, and I will, within 24 hours, I will process the order, and it will be in the printer and on its way to you as soon as they get it printed. So that's how that works. But you can read it all listed, like 95% of this text is there. You can see I have Contents Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and Volume 4. And it's all there. The only thing that isn't there is the history of apocalyptic interpretation, which I printed separate, so it would be a supplement. So, because he put it in the appendix of Volume 4, but I thought it was a great standalone work, and I've read it several times, and of course I had to read it several times to publish it and do all the corrections and stuff. Because when you're going from a PDF to a Word document, you have to look at every word, otherwise you end up with a mess. And I didn't mind doing it because I wanted to read it and I wanted to know it, and so reading it more than several times has been a great boost to my knowledge of history and scripture and the apocalypse and interpretation. So yeah, take advantage of that if you can. It's all there for you. You don't have to buy it, but if you want it for your library, it's there, and this is the best version you're going to be able to buy anywhere. But you can see all the updates that I put in it. I had to rearrange some of the chapters in some of the volumes too, because E.B. Elliott had the seventh millennia beginning at the end of the 19th century. He thought he was that close. So when he made a mistake and he had to put some things that were yet future into the past, and that's where the errors that we're talking about that people are repeating, that's where they came in. So, and perhaps would have made the same errors myself, likely would have. But, history moves on, and prophecy is unveiled as history moves on. Okay, we're going to jump back into let's see what we're talking about when we left. We're on number 4. None of the succeeding sea beasts were a division of any of the ones before them. They only assimilate when in the same locality. This is what we learn from divine interpretation. They do not divide into another beast power. Any division is noted by the addition of horns. Now, so we have kind of a rule here. This is what divine interpretation reveals to us. So someone could say, well, but couldn't it happen separately, if differently? Well, yeah, I guess it could happen differently. Your interpretation is viable, but it is not supported by Scripture. And I believe that God is not going to do it differently. He's not going to give us a divine interpretation. He's not going to reveal everything that he reveals to us about beast powers, then introduce another beast power and somehow make it totally different than what he has determined beast powers were before. It's not going to go from beast powers that start over a certain locality on the physical earth somewhere, represented by the beast or by the sea or the earth, or where, because we only have those 2 localities where these 7 beasts rose up. Now we know that 4 of them rose up out of the sea, and we know 1 of them rose up out of the earth. And so the Scripture names, names 4, tells us where 5 of them came from, 4 out of the sea, 5 out of the earth. But if there's 7, well, then there's a couple more that are unnamed, as well as one that rose up out of the earth. We don't know. The name of it is not given in the Scripture. So that kind of leaves it open. But it doesn't leave it open for us to say, well, now a division, not only a division, but an order, a priestly order of the apostate church is now a beast power. See, I don't think that we're open to make that determination, because none of the beasts that are divinely interpreted and revealed to us in the Scripture were that. They all rose up over a certain locality on the earth. Even the Roman Empire rose up at Rome, being the city where it rose up, in the locality around it. It was an original power in the earth that rose up over a specific locality. And then it came to conquer the whole of Western Europe. Okay? And that's true with all of the 4 named beast powers. So to come along and say, well, that's not necessary for this new beast that rises up out of the earth. But see, then we have to say, well, rise up out of the earth instead of out of the sea. So there's the difference there. We have to determine what the difference is between the symbol of rising up out of the symbolic sea and rising up out of the symbolic earth. What's the difference there? Okay, but it still has to be what is determined and what has been revealed to us as a beast power by the Scripture. So therefore, the determination of it being a priestly order of the apostate church, it doesn't qualify, because that priestly order was never a governing authority over a certain locality where it rose up in the earth. It was not that. It doesn't qualify by divine interpretation to be a beast. So let's continue here. Moving on. And because if there was a division in a beast, guess what? Number 6, horns appear on a beast when there is a notable division of power. We learn this first from the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, from Daniel 8:20. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, Alexander. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation. So we know that there is a division of power in a beast. It is represented by horns, not by dividing the beast into several beasts, because that's what our expositor that we were referring to on this website, where he changed his title but did not change the content of the thing. That's what he is saying. Yeah. But the Scripture, I believe, excludes that. He can stick with it if he wants. It's a free country, But I believe, and the reason I'm not really going after him, but he claims to be a historicist, and I think we need to extricate as much error from historicism as possible, so that we already got the Seventh-day Adventists, which are not historicists, neither are they Protestant or Reformed. Okay? And I have a post on my website that I title that the SDA Church is neither Reformed nor Protestant. So you can read about that. So we already got them out there giving us a black eye by claiming to be us. Okay? But this guy has a lot right, but he just has it in the wrong place. And then when people read it, they're going, this doesn't work, So we need to clean up our house here. If we're going to be historicists and not Seventh-day Adventists, then we have to clean up our house, okay? And get all of this unbiblical, these theses that aren't supported by Scripture, and weeding them out, or saying, hey, this is my idea, this is what I think, this is my thesis, but not claiming it as the truth and the fact, and rejecting everything else because of it. Now, if someone's going to reject my thesis, I want them to show me in the Scripture that they can exclude it by Scripture, which is exactly what I'm doing here, is excluding it by Scripture. So we see that horns appear on a beast when there's a notable division of power. We learned this first, and I read all of that. So we have the examples. This is explicitly stated in the Scripture. A beast doesn't divide into another beast. It divides first, like Greece, which had one notable horn, and the only reason it had one horn was because it was going to divide into 4. So we see that divisions, the horn, if the beast never divides, well, it wouldn't have to note the horn. But because this beast divided, later they had to note that it was one horn to begin with, but divided into 4. So we have rules for interpretation here. We have divine interpretation. How do we, when we get to Revelation, where none of these details are, this is where we find them. Okay? What we don't find by divine interpretation in the Revelation itself, we can look into Daniel, which uses the same symbols. Okay, Revelation demonstrates the distinction between the Roman beast empire and the false prophet, the blasphemous mouth it leads. Yeah, I believe you're right there. And here's the fact is, this author also believes, and I believe that several of our expositors from history, historicists, even repeated this, that the earth beast is the false prophet. There's nothing in the text anywhere that supports that. This is a total assumption and presupposition or thesis that is unsupported by Scripture. And this one is easy to settle. If you have something that is false, well, the best way to expose it is by knowing that which is true. So if you want to know who the false prophet is, well, at first you have to discover who the true prophet is. And who is the true prophet? Okay, speaking of Israel, who was that prophet that Israel was waiting for? Well, when they spoke of that prophet, okay, with a definite article before it, that prophet, when they spoke of that prophet, they were speaking of the one spoken of by Moses. A prophet is going to rise up like me, he said. And that was the prophet that they were waiting for. And who was that prophet? Well, he was the true prophet. When he was all alone by himself, you don't call something true if you're not looking at a false at the same time, or if a false doesn't rise up. You don't need to call it the true prophet until the false arises. Then you say, well, that one's false. Here's the true one. Okay? before he was called the true prophet, he was called that prophet. And that prophet was the Messiah. The true prophet was Jesus. So the answer is easy as to who the false prophet is. The false prophet is another name for the man of sin, the Antichrist. That's who the false prophet is. He is the Antichrist. He is the antithesis of the true prophet. So that settles that right there. And that's what the scripture supports. And I just gave you the supports from Moses on down through history. And it's logical besides. And I love it when things are logical. You can't, that's much more supported by scripture and logic than trying to say that the false prophet is a beast. Because a false prophet is either an individual or a line of individuals. In this case, it's a line of individuals when it's the false prophet, as referred to in the Revelation chapter 19, as Mercury falling brought up in the scripture there. Okay, that is the false prophet with a definite article. We have a false prophet mentioned in the epistles, I believe, or the Gospels, where it's an individual who is named as a false prophet. But this is the false prophet, which I believe is a line of men, like the man of God is a line of men. You know, someone could refer to me as the man of God that lives on such and such a street or over there in the foothills. Or they could refer to you as the man of God because they see you always standing up for God. And you are a man of God. So that's who the false prophet is. He is the same as the Antichrist, who we put the definite article before Antichrist. It is the Antichrist, or the man of sin. You know, there may be a man of sin here and there, but the man of sin is referring to a certain individual or a line of men. And I believe in the case of the scripture, it is that line of men, and that entire line of men is going to end, and they're going to be cast into the lake of fire. Yes, as the scripture says there in chapter 19. Both the false prophet and who else? I believe it's the dragon, the false prophet, and the beast. There you go. Are they separate individuals? Did I get that right? Tell me if I got it wrong. Anyway, I'm running out of time, but it's something to look at. Revelation 19:20. Let's look at it quickly here. Revelation 19:20. And I believe if I got that right. And the beast. Okay, the beast was taken, the false prophet, and which deceived them. And these both were cast alive in the fire. And the beast and the false prophet are separate. The beast is not the false prophet. The false prophet is not a beast. He may be a man that controls the beast. He may be the mouth that little horn was speaking with blasphemy. Of course, the little horn representing the Vatican or papal Rome. Okay? He may be the mouth of the beast speaking great things and blasphemies, that line of the man of sin, the false prophet. So the beast was taken, with him the false prophet that wrought miracles, and both were cast alive into the lake of fire. So the beast and the prophet and the false prophet are different. That's true. A beast is not a singular man. But, like, say, if Joe Biden, the pretender in chief, speaks, well, they say America said. But it's the mouth of the beast that's speaking. And not the beast itself, but the mouth speaks for the beast. But the mouth, the man is not the beast, but he may control and represent the beast at some time or other, and there may be times when he does not. Okay? So, okay, well, let's see, what else do I have? So now we fast forward to the beast symbols that appear in the Revelation and the New Testament era. And we go to chapter 12, introduces a great red dragon. And this beast was different from all of the others, and something that occurred to me, a revelation of a sort. It had 10 horns, and this beast The previous three were warm-blooded animals of the four beast powers that rose up out of the sea, whereas this beast is cold-blooded. So there is a difference there. I was looking for differences because this beast is diverse. And so one of the ways it was diverse or different from the three that came before it is this one is cold-blooded. It's a dragon. It's a lizard. It's cold-blooded, whereas the other were warm-blooded beasts or animals. This beast is also the only one with multiple heads, and it devours the whole earth. So there are three differences. These others only devoured part of Western Europe, part of the kingdom, almost the whole kingdom, but Rome rose up and devoured the entirety of Western Europe, and I believe the whole earth, literally and not just figuratively speaking of the Western Roman world, but the whole earth as it is today and as it now rules, was and is not. It rules vicariously through the image constructed by the seventh beast, mentioned the earth beast, the two-horned earth beast, which rises up. And what I'm going to do in my next book, probably the last one that I'm going to write, is I'm going to do an exposition of all of the apocalyptic beast power scriptures throughout the whole Bible. And it's part of the work that I'm revealing to you today. Whoops, I think I accidentally hung up instead of answering that. Too close to the end. You have to call in sooner if that was anyone beside my ghost caller. So, yeah, it's too late. 10:55, we don't take any more calls. So I move on. So you get an idea of what I'm working on here, which I'm not going to post until it's completed, but I'm giving you a little preview. So we fast forward, we look at the chapter 12. So we're going to expose chapter 12, 13, the other instances where beast powers or anyone related to the beast, any mention of a beast text in Daniel or the Revelation or anywhere else in the scripture they're mentioned. And we're going to do an exposition of all of those together. And that's what my next book or work will be that I publish in my prophecy series that I'm doing. It will be on Apocalyptic-Beast-Symbols, Bible-Decoded, an exposition of all of apocalyptic beast symbol and related scriptures in one volume. And I think that's a work that needs to be done because it clears up a lot. If you have that information, then you know when something violates that divine interpretation, because that's where I'm going with this. We want to base everything we do on divine interpretation. If we don't, and we have a hypothesis, we can't base it on divine interpretation, then we say, this is hypothesis. I could be wrong, I could be right, and I'm willing to live with that, because I can't find anything in Scripture to overthrow it or support it. In that case, it's only hypotheses. But if I can find a Scripture to explicitly support it, then I know I've got divine interpretation on the side of my hypothesis. If I can find anything to overthrow it, then I throw it away and I say that doesn't work because the Scripture excludes it. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all for joining me on this broadcast. You've been listening to my Prophecy Reality Edition. Please go to my website, nicholasarthur.wordpress.com or crosstheborder.org, and make sure you follow there. And as always, may the Almighty bless you and keep you as you travel on the narrow way that leads to life. We'll see you next time. The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone. absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.